Good evening here in New York and Ohio gozaimasu there in Tokyo. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Joshua Walker, president of Japan Society. I'm particularly excited tonight to be able to not only screen a film that was far ahead of its time that we screened here at Japan Cuts in 2016, Born With It, but to have a timely and very important conversation. For that, let me turn to the real mastermind, my friend, partner in crime, Patsy Brown, Executive Director of the Japan American Society of Houston. Patsy, thank you so much for partnering with us today. I'm really excited for what we have for today.
Thank you, Joshua, and good evening, everyone, to our friends in America, and good morning to those of you who are joining us from Japan. As Joshua mentioned, the past several weeks have really been filled with tremendous sadness, pain, and frustration as the consequences of racism and injustice have unraveled on our streets and across the globe. The social unrest that has truly laid bare the greater need for people from all walks of life to move forward together for a more diverse, inclusive, equitable, and just society. And tonight, we aim to do just that as we unite with our friends at Japan Society in New York and other Japan America societies across the US to explore critical issues addressed in the film Born With It. Joining us tonight is the film's director, Emmanuel Osei-Kuffour Jr., as well as columnist and activist Baye McNeil. We also have a special guest, singer-songwriter Michael Yano, and moderating tonight's conversation is Dr. Mitzi Uehara Carter. So tonight we will watch Keisuke, young Keisuke on his first day at his new school. Join us for Born With It. 途中編入でご迷惑をおかけしますけど、よろしくお願いします。お願いします。ケイスケ、校長先生が教室まで連れてってくれるって。お願いします。よろしくね。静かに、今日から転校してきたケイスケくんです。ケイスケくん、自己紹介お願いします。
東京の高田馬場に住んでいました藤井ケイスケです。お母さんの仕事の関係でここに引っ越してきました。テレビゲームとキャッチボールが好きです。よろしくお願いします。以上です。
ありがとう、ケイスケくん。
はい。
健太くん。
なんで日本語話せるんですか？
日本人だからです。
ケイスケ、そこね。
はい、それでは授業始めます。教科書の7ページ開いてください。ここは先週もみんなで読みましたよね。感想文書いてきたかな。
あいつ絶対いいやつだって。
直光くん、読んでください。
はい。
土の中の生き物たちを読んでいる。
なんだって？
私が一番驚いたのは土の中にいる
いつだって？そっちがやつなんじゃない？
自分の肌見てみろよ。お前の体見てみればわかるって。
いっぱいにならないのは微生物の働きを有効に利用してゴミを分解しているからなのだ。そうした時、私は
みんなに移すなよ。
目に見えないくらいの生き物が
ケイスケくん、健太くん。
も あいつに触るなよ。気をつけろよ。クリア物語じゃないの。昭和なし。そんなことない昭和です。昭和です。
なんで僕のこと病気だってみんなに言うの？
なんで自分で
僕は病気なんかじゃない。
気持ち悪い。
聞いてよ。
遊ぼう。これ取れるか？
よし。
大丈夫？
僕病気かもしれないのになんで一緒に遊んだの？
何の病気？
合図。
エイズ？エイズでしょ？僕は大丈夫だよ。
でももし本当に病気で感染しちゃったら？
ネットで調べたけど誰かに触っただけじゃ感染しないってさ。うつるのは血を触った時だけ。ねえ、なんでマスクしてるの？
念のため。
ねえ、さっき言ったじゃん。ねえ、やめなよ。
やめてよ。もし移ったらどうすんの？
ごめん。
いいよ。
ねえ、お父さんもこの町に引っ越してきたの？じゃあなんでお父さんはこの町に来なかったの？
いろいろあって。
ねえ、いろいろって何？ね
置いてよ。
え、何？
もう死んだんだ。
あ、ごめん。
いいよ。だいぶ前の話だから。ねえ、大丈夫だ。あ。この曖昧検索ってところをクリックして。僕セックスなんてしてないよ。
本当に？
本当だよ。
両親からも感染すると書いてあるよ。
圭介くん、
ご迷惑をおかけして申し訳ありません。はい。すいません。ちょっとこちらから折り返しご連絡させていただいてもよろしいですか？はい、すいません。中入ろう。風邪ひいちゃうから入ろう。
クラスの男の子が僕は肌が黒いからエイズだって。
ねえ、ケイスケ聞いて。あなたはエイズじゃない。もしそうだとしてお母さんがそのこと黙ってると思う？
お母さん何も分かってない。
私はあなたのお母さんよ。
お母さんはみんなと肌の色が一緒だから分かんないんだよ。
圭介君のカルテを見ると東京出る前に血液検査をしていますね。圭介君は健康体だ。
じゃあ僕は病気じゃない？
誰だってエイズになる可能性もあるんだよ。肌の色なんて関係ない。
お時間いただいてありがとうございました。
田舎ではいろいろと大変でしょう。お母さん具合はいかがですか？
その紙何枚かコピーしていいですか？
なんで？
みんなに見せたいんだ。
ダメよ。
なんで？僕と遊べるってみんなに信用してもらいたいんだ。
圭介、もう病気じゃないって分かったでしょ？じゃあもうこの紙は必要ないでしょ？パパもね、最初に日本に来た時は同じように苦労したと思う。パパと一緒に出かけるといっつもみんな黙ったままパパのこと見つめてね、その視線がすごく嫌な感じだったの。だからママはパパにどこかに引っ越そうって何度も言ったのよ。そしたらパパなんて言ったと思う？
なんて言ったの？
他人に自分の人となりを決められたくないって。この意味わかる？あなたは藤井圭介なの。あなたがどういう人間か人に決めてもらうんじゃなくて、あなた自身で自分はこういう人間ですってみんなに伝えていかなきゃいけないの。笑って。心の準備はできてる？
まだなんて説明すればいいか分かんないよ。
先生にはあなたのこと病気だって言った子のことは伝えてあるからね。いい圭介、これはあなた自身の戦いなのよ。ほら行きなさい。これ以上第一印象悪くしたくないでしょ。
これ何やってんの？何？ドイツ。帰ってくると。なんなんだよ。
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the Japan Societies of Houston and New York for setting up this wonderful talk. It's an honor to be here in the company of such good friends and colleagues. Emmanuel, this is such a beautiful film, and I've seen it before, but it resonates a little bit differently for me right now in this kind of strange and also hopeful moment when the world is kind of just catching up to what many of us have long known or intimately felt, that there are deep injustices in need of real systemic change beyond the kind of peace, love, and multicultural happiness model. Back in, I think it's like early 2000s, Chimamanda Adichie, who's a Nigerian writer, gave this brilliant TED talk about the danger of a single story. And as I watched that film, as I kind of remember watching this film before, and I'm reminded about her talk. She discussed why there's a danger in the circulation of the single story that is often created about people who are usually depicted as inferior. Those are stories that can float around not only domestically, but internationally as well. And they're dangerous because they can be internalized and passed on intergenerationally. These are stories that have a tremendous sticking power, right? They stick because we absorb them through the books that we read, through the films that we watch, through the icons that we see around us. I remember growing up seeing a Sambo baby thing that we had in our house that my mom had from Japan, you know, and they shape our everyday narratives that we have about ourselves. And we may not even understand how deeply they are shaping the way that we think about people who are different from ourselves. And they often prevent us from even creating new possibilities for new narratives, ways of being and belonging in a nation state. And I think that all of you panelists who are here today have attempted to break up that single story about Blackness, right? And what that means both in the United States and in Japan. There are so many beautiful ways to be Black. But it's the power, the magic power of racism that tries to attempt us to force us into one single model, one single identity. And so what I want to do is kind of talk about the ways that single stories are plopped onto mixed race peoples, in particular Black Japanese people, right? Sometimes that single story can be a tragic story, right? Oh, that kawaii person, you know, they have no agency or power to change their life. And on the other side of that, you have the, oh, you're a super hafu, you know, you are here to change the racist ideas that we have in our society, you know, because you are a bridge person, right? And those tragedy or that super hyper romanticized story are both dangerous because they deny us the wonderful range of who we can be. So with that said, I want to open up the discussion to you, Emmanuel, first, so you can kind of give us a little background on the story that your viewers here today who've chimed in are missing right now. Because it's a film that's not just about mixed race people or difference in Japan. It's specifically about a rural experience of Black Japanese child, right? And last night we had a beautiful conversation on the phone and about, you know, what drew you to the subject matter. And I was really struck by your response. You mentioned that you were drawn to Japanese cinema because of the way that Japanese filmmakers told stories about belonging. And you were really connected to that storytelling methodology because of, you know, your own sense of feeling in between in the United States. So I was hoping you can talk a little bit more about the story, what drew you to it, and you know, catch us all up on what we missed just now because of the choppiness in the film.
Yeah, thanks Mitzi, and thanks for joining. And these headphones are kind of weird, but I can't hear anything, so they're really noise canceling. But yes, thanks the Japan Society of New York, Japan America Society of Houston for having me, having all my friends, Baye, Mitzi, and Michael Yano. I think this is an important conversation. I'm glad we could have it online. And I think there will be more people involved now that we're virtual and remote. So just to kind of catch people up on what the film is actually about, the film follows a 10-year-old half African, half Japanese boy named Keisuke. And it's his very first day of school in the Japanese countryside, very, very rural, small town, 2 hours north of Tokyo. And he joins his classmates, and on the very first day of school, his classmates are shocked that he speaks Japanese. And one of his classmates, who's intimidated by him, starts to accuse him of having AIDS because his skin is dark. And so he starts to spread this rumor around school. And so soon people, all the other kids in his class are afraid to touch him. They're afraid to hang out with him. And soon he starts to internalize the idea that he in fact might be sick. And it's not until he, you know, befriends this boy, this slightly heavyset boy in his classroom, it's not until that point that he actually starts to stop thinking those thoughts. But the climax of the film hits when he looks up what AIDS really is, and he starts to see a plethora of images of Black kids and Black adults with the AIDS virus, and it confirms all of his worst fears, and he begins to believe that he in fact is about to die. The film ends with his mother basically having to confront him. His mother is Japanese. It ends with his mother having to, confront him and tell him that, his dad, who's not in the story, I don't really go into the details as to why he's not in the story, but she begins to talk to his experience, speak to his experience when he first arrived in Japan, and how his father was really self-conscious, and she herself was self-conscious of being with an African. But his father would always say things like, "I won't let people define me. I refuse to let people define who I am and who I want to be." And those words stick with Keisuke, our protagonist, and he's then able to get the courage to kind of metaphorically take off the label that people are placing on him. At the beginning of the film, they give him a mask, kind of like the mask we have now, because they don't want him to spread his infection and his disease. And at the end of the film, he takes it off and decides to go into the classroom for the first time. And that's kind of how the film ends. But yeah, I think it raises important questions about just being different in Japan, being Black in Japan, but just being different in general, just universally, and just learning to accept yourself. But to answer Mitzi's original question as to why I made the film, so I lived in Japan for about 6 to 7 years, and part of the reason I went there to begin with was I went to Stanford for undergrad, and we had this really great study abroad program where I got to live in Japan for 3 months in Kyoto and then 3 months in Tokyo at an internship, like doing an internship. And it was during my time there that I was exposed to Japanese television and film for the very first time in my life. And every story that I would watch on the cinema or on television, the characters were always struggling to find their tribe. They're always struggling to find a place that they belonged. And for whatever reason, even though the characters on screen looked nothing like me, I connected deeply to the stories that these characters were experiencing, the stories that the filmmakers were portraying on screen. And I think part of the reason I felt that way was because I'm the son of two Ghanaian parents. I'm first generation American. And even though I am Black, because I was raised by Ghanaian parents, my mom and my dad, they valued faith and education more than anything else. And they didn't grow up with the same, I guess, access to, they didn't grow up with the same knowledge of Black American history and culture. And so as a result, I never had the talk. I never, experienced or had a lot of like Black music, Black culture, just a lot of the nuances of what it meant to be a Black American weren't really shared in the home. And so I always felt like I wasn't Black enough when I was young, but also at the same time, because my mom valued education and faith more than anything else, I didn't have much access to like the African community in Texas, which is where I grew up. And so I never connected to my African side either. So I always felt like I was in between. I was always in between cultures. I was always trying to find my tribe, trying to find a place that I felt like I belonged. And so that's what really stuck to me when I started watching these films and these TV shows in Japan. And when I ended up moving to Japan, I lived and worked there for a good amount of time. And I found that no matter how good at the language I got, no matter how how much I understood the culture, I was never fully accepted. I was always treated as, you know, subconsciously less than, you know? And so it was tough. It was really, really tough. It was always like I was trying to go from negative to zero just to be accepted and feel like I had a place at the table, both professionally and socially sometimes. And so for me as a filmmaker, I've always been interested in communicating my experience through cinema. I think film is an empathy, is a medium of empathy, and you know, it's more effective for me to write a story or to write a film than it is to write an essay on my experiences. And so that's kind of where the idea for Born With It first came up. Originally, it was supposed to be about an African boy that moves to Japan and is in an international school, and he is faced with his Blackness for the first time in his life. And he starts to think something is wrong with him. But as I was writing the story and I started to talk to some of my mixed race friends, I started to gather that they had the exact same experience that I had, but they were in fact Japanese. And so I thought it would be way more poignant and way more powerful if I told a story about a mixed race boy, half Black, half Japanese boy, going through the experience of facing his, facing the negative stereotypes that people associate with his skin color, and having to accept himself in the face of that for the very first time in his life. So that was a little long-winded, but yeah, that's why I made Born With It.
Thank you. That was really informative. I always learn something new when you talk about your film. I'm going to move on to Michael, because I think this next question is going to tie into some of the things that you just raised. Michael, in my field and in social sciences in general, we often talk a lot about identity and the way that those identity questions arise for many people. And it usually comes when there's some kind of, they're taken for granted, their normal ways of going through life starts to shift. So for example, I hear a lot of Japanese people tell me, oh, I didn't realize how Japanese I was until I went to study abroad, you know, in the United States, or, you know, like my Okinawan friends, when they go over to Tokyo, they're like, oh, I didn't really fully understand the contours of my Okinawan-ness until I went to Tokyo. And, you know, you start to really understand all of the ways that you're culturally unique when that taken for granted sense of self is shifted. But for many mixed race people like us, we kind of feel that disruption very early on, at a very early age, right? As demonstrated in the film. And I remember I interviewed this young Black Okinawan man, this is a while ago, and he said to me, he was at a bookstore, this is in Naha, he was at a bookstore reading a manga, and one of the workers, Okinawan workers, came over to him, try to practice English, right? And he didn't really know English, right? this man. And he just kind of pretended he did. He just kind of went along with it. And he said to me, because I asked him, why would you do that? And he said, I just couldn't stomach one more explanation. You know, it was so unbearable to answer that whole question of, why do you speak Japanese so well? Or how come you don't speak English? Or he just couldn't stomach it for another day. And so that he would rather mime Americanness, right? And I know that his experience is his experience. It doesn't mean that that's everybody's experience, but it made me realize how exhausting it can sometimes be to have to repeatedly question your identity and being forced to rethink your sense of belonging and answer, are you really Japanese? You know, that question over and over and over again. It can either create a very strong resentment or a strong sense of Afro-Japanese optimism, right? And you seem to take the latter approach, you know, talking a lot to your followers, people who follow your music, about what it means for you to be Black and Japanese. And I wanted to ask you about how you think, you know, there might be possibilities for change, like real change in Japan, because it's hard to describe this feeling we have to people who may not have had the chance to question their own sense of identity, racial identity, or even national identity. So, Michael-san, can you please talk a little bit about that?
Thank you for inviting me, and Emmanuel, congratulations. And thank you to Japan New York Society, Japan Houston Society. And sorry, I'm a little bit like on social distance jet lag. I didn't really sleep. I was so nervous. I couldn't wait for this. And well, getting back to the question, as you said, you interviewed a black half kid in Okinawa, and he was tired of all. I understand. I've been through all that, but from my view, answering all these questions are a way of changing the situation. That's what I think. So I'll get on the taxi. I'll get on it, whatever. Like, I still get it like every day. But I keep telling people, I go through this every day, but it's okay. If I see somebody who's green, of course I'm going to be like, if I never saw anybody like somebody different from me. So it is hard, but what I just want to share is all these, experience that we're going through. It might be hard, but it's one of the key of changing the actual Japan that we live in right now. Mm-hmm.
So for you, it's on the individual level of constantly answering those questions.
Yes, I feel like I have a responsibility because I had to go through that because there was nobody before me. But if I'm here now, I want to change something for the future generation, or even in this life that I'm living right now. So it's all about sharing like feelings, and I wish people can be more like to anticipate how people will feel before it actually happens. But talking to these taxi drivers in Tokyo, they start to like understand and be like, wow, I didn't know there was an angle like that of feeling things and stuff. But sharing all these stories, the taxi drivers always tell me, next time I see a black guy, he might be able to speak Japanese. Like, he might not be even Japanese, or mixed. But sharing all these stories and talking about our experience are, I think, one of the best key to change Japan or this world that we live in with these kind of situations. Thank you.
Thank you. I see there's some questions also coming in from YouTube. I'll get to those in just a minute here. I'm going to go straight to Baye first, and then maybe we can all come together and talk with each other about some of the things that we've individually raised here. Baye, can you hear me okay now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
Okay, so it's been a long time since we've talked.
It has been.
I usually bring Baye into via Skype into my classrooms, my race and ethnicity class, and so we always kind of talk a lot about the same subject.
Yeah.
So this is a film that brings up a lot of really interesting, and it's short. It's a short film, but it's so powerful because, Emmanuel, you've been able to kind of bring in a lot of really things that might be very disturbing for people to watch. Things that have been kind of, that are often repeated uncomfortably in our modern world. And that is, I think, the old legacy of eugenic thinking, that certain racialized bodies are kind of naturally polluted, right? Or susceptible to contagious diseases. And that's a type of dangerous thinking that's led to, segregation policies to keep people from really being fully included in the nation. So, for example, the belief that Burakumin people were polluted, right? And they needed to be separated into segregated neighborhoods, or that, Eastern Europeans coming into the United States in the early 1900s, that they were somehow natural carriers of diseases, so they needed to be in ghettos, or that Black people were prone to somehow, they're so contaminated that they couldn't be in the same swimming pool or walk up and down the same, staircase as white people in the Jim Crow South, right? So these are kind of that kind of thinking is very disturbing, and it's that kind of hard to squash idea of dark skin, of blackness linked to some kind of extreme difference and also disease that's raised in this film to some degree. And you have discussed some of these issues and some elements of this in your own book. You've talked about the kind of prejudicial fear, that real kind of fear that some people harbor against you just because of your skin color. And I know that you've done a lot of important work in Japanese public about, kind of detailing the varied and multiple experiences of Black people living in Japan, and you've been pushing networks and their viewers to really, embrace the discomfort when it comes to talking about race, because there tends to be a prejudice against talking about prejudice. People are like, oh, I don't want to get to that topic, it makes me uncomfortable. And that's very hard. That's a very culturally challenging thing to do in Japan, anywhere, but especially I think in Japan, right? I have to do it with my own mother still. She married a Black man and raised us 4 Blackanese kids, right? So, I have to constantly have these conversations with her. So I was wondering if you could take this moment to talk about, you've seen the film, right? Yes. The themes that were raised in this film, and perhaps discuss some of the successful strategies you've seen, especially now in this particular moment that we're in, for creating new narratives around Blackness in Japan in particular.
First off, I just want to thank Japan Society New York and Houston for inviting me to come speak on this exciting and very educational, hopefully, and useful program. And I want to thank Emmanuel for making such an incredible film. And I've seen it several times, and it just blows me away each time. So amazing work, sir. As far as the narratives are concerned, I think one strategy for addressing the narratives or creating new narratives would be to let them develop organically, I've found. Of course, there are those of us who would like to direct these narratives in a way that we think would be most conducive to bringing about the changes that we all want to see. But I've found that also the reason that the old narratives persist is mostly due to ignorance and miseducation. So once you present people with proper education, generally there's a narrative that develops on its own. Let me give you an example. I have private students, and they're the ones who get the most direct exposure to my thinking and my ideas. And I have one student, so she said that she wasn't aware about the empty seat situation. And I don't know if I need to explain the empty seat a little bit, should I?
Yeah.
Well, in Japan, many non-Japanese, conspicuous non-Japanese will experience when they're on a train or in a public space, a cafe, walking down the street, in a bus, that the seat beside them might remain empty despite when there's no other seats available on the train or the bus or in the cafe, the seat behind them will remain empty because there's this fear of being too close to foreigners. What prompts that fear is debatable, but some people say it's because they're afraid you might, just blurt out some English to them and embarrass them. Some people think it's like what you were saying earlier, Mitzi, about darkness being disease prone or something to that effect. But it's a consistent thing, and most non-Japanese here in Japan have experienced it and continue to experience it, myself included. And that was the theme of my first book, Hi, My Name is Loco and I'm a Racist, that living in Japan as a non-Japanese, in order to progress here and be able to be successful here, you have to develop a relationship with this phenomenon, this empty seat phenomenon, and you have to figure out a way to overcome it and manage it. You have to manage those feelings, because if you're unable to manage them, they're going to destroy you in some way, shape, or form. They're going to deteriorate your goodwill towards man, so to speak, and it's going to make the ability to give Japanese the benefit of the doubt, or to extend that goodwill that we all came here with, to Japanese people, because you're going to feel like there's this inherent inability to deal with non-Japanese people, and that's going to just have a negative impact on every relationship you try to build in Japan. So you had to find a way to manage those ideas and manage those feelings, and that's what I've trying to help people do through that first book. So the student was telling me she was telling me that she had gotten on the train and she had seen a black man on this crowded train, and there was a seat empty beside him. And she was so surprised. She said, "This is the first time I saw it, and I probably wouldn't have even noticed it if you hadn't brought it to my attention, in a number of lessons." And I said, "So, okay, how did you feel?" She said, I was disgusted. I couldn't believe that, that we were capable of alienating people and marginalizing people in this way. I didn't think that, Japanese people like that, because it's not part of the current narrative that we do this type of thing to people, whether they're Japanese or non-Japanese. It's just not part of her mindset. So when she saw it, what she said was, "I went and I sat in the seat." I said, "Okay, it was an empty seat. You should sit in it." She's like, "Yeah," but to her, that was an act of activism. As far as she was concerned, she was actively participating and bringing about change. And I said, "Whoa, keep that up." So this response was organic. I didn't direct her that way. I didn't tell her what she should do. She figured it out on her own. It just came to her naturally. I think, for the most part, if you present the facts to people, they're gonna think of some wonderful ideas to address the problems that here in Japan. So I don't think Japan, the fear and ignorance that's developed over the years in Japan has come from the same source as white supremacy. I mean, of course, white supremacy is part of it, definitely. When Perry came here, Commodore Perry opened up Japan at gunpoint, kicked in the door, waving the 4-4 like Biggie Smalls says. When he did that, that was white supremacy, introducing itself to Japan. And Japan had to deal with it ever since then. And they introduced blackface at that time, the bakufu. So this was when not only white supremacy, but stereotypes about black people were first introduced to Japan. And these stereotypes, these caricatures of stereotypes continue until this day. Just a couple of weeks ago, NHK did the same thing. So these things are continue in Japan. These narratives continue, but they came from not a hateful source as opposed to America, where it comes from well, that's a whole nother conversation. But I don't think what happens here in Japan comes from the exact same source. It's a derivation. It's derived from that, but it is not that completely. So I think that we can address it differently, and we can allow for Japanese to come up with a Japanese solution. Because for the most part, they're not going to accept solutions hammered into their heads by non-Japanese. I found in all my years of working here, I think most of course, I would impress my ideas about them, but most of the solutions for example, let me give you another example. In 2015, there was an instance where a doo-wop group called Rats and Star, who perform in blackface, were about to perform on Fuji TV in blackface. And there was a petition that was started by myself, I spearheaded it, that to get Fuji TV to censor and edit this program, or to cancel this program. And there was so much pushback on Twitter against this, saying, "Who are you to come into our country and tell us, how we should, conduct ourselves, or how we should entertain ourselves, or how we should, what kind of programming should we make for ourselves?" And they're right. They were absolutely right. So I said, you know what? For this petition, I'm not going to target a bunch of foreigners trying to, guilt Japanese into changing their feelings and ideas about blackface. I'm going to address Japanese. So I made the petition in Nihongo. I addressed Japanese people about why blackface is seen as problematic to Westerners. You can decide for yourself if this is the kind of image you want to put out there, but keep in mind that everything that you put out and everything that you broadcast, there's no longer any localized broadcast. Everything you do is going to be global. The whole world is going to be watching what you're doing. So keep that in mind as you put out this blackface, which is going to be interpreted by the West as at best ignorant and at worst ridiculously racist. If you want to keep that, if you don't mind that image of Japan, continue to do this. And this is what I put in Japanese, and it was signed by so many Japanese people, this petition. And I found that once you presented it in that way, there was an organic response to that narrative of, because the narrative that maintained that blackface was that Rats and Star felt like this is our way of paying homage to Black people. We love Black people, we love Black culture, we love Black music, and this is how we show it, by painting our faces Black and performing and doo-wop. But at this point, they were trying to pass this baton of ignorance on to the next generation, to this J-pop group called Momo Ito Cloverzetto, who had nothing to do with Black music, Black culture, and Black history. So why are you putting them in blackface? This is the reason I started the protest in the first place. But I had to keep in mind that they're a beloved group. They've been doing this since the 80s, and you're trying to, you're really going after a staple of Japanese society. Their desire to perform in blackface, their love of this, and their belief that it's innocuous. So I had to be careful how I did it, and this is how I went about it. And as a result of going about it this way, I was able to achieve something organically. I think it wasn't about me telling them what they should do. It was about them deciding for themselves what's the best thing to do or how's the best way to approach it. So I hope I answered addressed your question there as far as strategies or narratives strategies to creating new narratives here. I think give people the information they need, and I think Japanese people themselves will come up with some great strategies to change the narratives.
Thank you, Baye. Michael or Emmanuel, do you have any response to that?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my opinion on how to break the narrative is the media, and going back to, films and television being empathy machines. I think, obviously there's like a movement right now that's been continuous for the last few years of, being more inclusive in Hollywood. And as a result, we see a lot more shades of what it means to be Black in America, and just a person of color in general in storytelling in Hollywood. But I think, like, when we're talking about Japan, Hollywood has a big influence on, they have a big foothold in Japan, but a lot of Japanese people watch local content. They watch like a lot of dramas. They listen to like local pop music. They watch local films. And a lot of times, like a lot of the progressive movements or inclusion that we have in Hollywood don't quite trickle down to Japan. Maybe in Tokyo, but not to the rest of Japan. And so I think obviously like content is reflective of the culture it's in, but I think there are moments in Japanese films and television shows where they do decide to include foreigners, like Black people specifically. And a lot of times when Black people are depicted in TV dramas or films or, music videos or whatnot, it's always a stereotype. Like they're big or they're loud, they're disruptive, and kind of like in worst cases, like animalistic or they're a joke. And it's just like, if that's all that, like when we do see Black people in the media in Japan, if that's all people see, then that's problematic, So to speak to Baye's point, like I think it's up to the content creators in Japan that, to make sure they do their research and don't lean towards the stereotypical, and talk to Black people when you're trying to depict them. I think that's the only way things are going to start to change as well.
Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
I totally agree with like all you guys, and as everyone said, like Japan is more like, I don't know the best word for like sabetsu and kubetsu. you know,
I don't know what kubetsu means, but sabetsu means discrimination, right?
Kubetsu is like seeing the different, like, you know, you see something and I forgot the English word for that, but like, yeah, there's a lot going on. There's been going on, but as they said, like, I think Japanese will come up with a way, and I want to believe so, you know. And this movie is of Emmanuel, like, it really means a lot to us in Japan, also probably in everywhere, but it's a really deep movie, like, Born With It. One of my favorite movies, and I'm waiting for the full, you know, version of it, Emmanuel. I can't wait, man.
Got to get that funding. Got to get that funding.
Right. But one more thing, you know, carrying a color that we have is a responsibility, you know. Like, there are people, cool people, and there are people who actually misbehave that gives a, you know, a bad image about carrying this color, you know. So what I have in mind every day is try to show a good example. Some people might say, you're more Japanese than Japanese. I'm like, thank you, you know, like, just try to show, you know, blend to the culture, you know. And I think that's all, you know. Mm-hmm. Sorry, man. I might have been talking about something different, but
no, you're talking about real issues, real things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's some interesting questions coming in from YouTube. And I want to take this one from Elliot here, who says, it seems like Keisuke's only ally is his mother. Do you see any positives in telling her son to take it upon himself to prove his class wrong, / have confidence, or is there something wrong there? And I want to kind of add onto this a little bit, because I've seen this kind of, you know, a lot of the burden about kind of deflecting racism is really put a lot on the parents, you know, or the child, instead of on creating kind of, and, you know, Ibrahim Kendi recently said, it's not love and education that's going to change, you know, it's got to be real awareness of structural kind of policies that are inherently racist, you know, and like really identifying those and then changing them. And he said, you know, love and awareness is not the end all. It's not enough to change. But I'm kind of blending two different things here. But you know, the burden seems so. A lot of times, you know, when you talk to people about mixed race folks, and people always say, "Oh, you should tell the mom or the dad to tell the kid to fight harder." You know, "Gambare." You know, they can fit in better if they just fight harder. And that's a burden to carry. You know, and so I don't know if you want to address that, and then this question as well.
You talking to me or Michael?
Oh, I'm sorry, Emmanuel.
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. Because I actually do think that to answer, is it Elliot? To answer Elliot's question, I think, I mean, he had, you know, that one friend in school, but I think that, yeah, it's tough, man. It is. It's really tough, because I think that if parents, because a lot of times, I'm not going to make a blanket statement, but in the research that I've done, and you could speak to this, Michael, if you don't mind what I'm about to say, because I think you know better than I do. But I think a lot of times, parents of mixed race children, there's this choice that you kind of have. You could either kind of raise your kid to fit in as much as possible, because, you know, Japan society is all about conformity, it's all about collectivism. And if you don't dress a certain way, if you don't talk a certain way, if you don't look a certain way, if you don't sit a certain way, if you don't eat a certain way, then you stick out. You're very self-conscious of the way you move through society, and that extends to skin color and, you know, just the way you present yourself to the world. And so a lot of times, I think parents, they have the choice of, okay, can we raise our child to feel as Japanese as possible? You know, and doing so, I think that suppresses the non-Japanese side. And in this case, like the the black side, unless you're raised in America, you know? If you're raised in Japan, I feel like this is a choice that you have to make. Or there's a choice of, really embracing the black side and celebrating where the black parent came from, and celebrating the culture. But in doing so, you're kind of, you're forcing them to stick out, you're forcing them to not be a part of the collective, and so it's tough. I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question, Mitzi, to be honest. But do you have any thoughts on that? I don't mean to put you on the spot, Michael, but if you happen to have any thoughts.
I mean, it's like if you had what I think is, if you had a son or a daughter being bullied at school, like, how are you gonna face it with your kid? Like, I mean, and when it comes to like being in between a different race, it kind of gets quite complicated, because sometimes from what I heard from my friends around, it's hard when both of the parents can't understand the situation that the kid is going through. And it's a tough thing to, as Emmanuel said, like, because my mom told me and my brothers when we came to Japan, like, she was like, show me your hand. She called us to this tatami room, and she had to tell us what we're gonna face. She's like, what do you see? We said, we see our hand. She's like, turn it around, what do you see? I said, a hand. She said, no, with that color in this world, you're gonna suffer, Well, she said it more in an African accent way, but I didn't wanna go too much that way. But I mean, when I heard that, I almost fainted. Like, I didn't know about that. And Ghana being mixed wasn't really a bad thing, experience for me. But I hear stories too, like have black kids going back to their other countryside and having problems. So, I mean, from the same colored people. So it's a really, really complicated, hard, situation. But I guess if it's your kid, like, I hope the parents can be walk more towards their children and try to understand. But I'm not trying to say the Japanese parent side is not good, but when it comes to a color issue, it's sometimes better to, learn from your parent that understand that kind of similar situation, and it's not only black people that have to face problem in the world. So I think it's a time coming now that people are going to start thinking and choosing their decisions they want to make, I hope that helped. And Emmanuel, I did my best.
Yeah, no, I think it's. I just want one thing I did want to say, Mitzi. To answer Elliot's question, I think there is something wrong. Like, I think it shouldn't just have to be the mother saying this. It shouldn't have to be that one friend they have in school. But you can't. I mean, like Baye said at the top, like, Japanese society is not going to change unless Japanese people decide they want it to change. And so that's part of the reason why I made the film. And I hope I'm able to make a longer version, or I hope more people can see this, but I also just hope that people like Naomi Osaka and Louis Okoye and
Hachimura.
And Ryu Hachimura are more open about their experience, because I think it's only until people hear it, until Japanese people hear the way mixed race people are treated, that they will then change, I don't know. I think that's really the only way. It's sad that, parents and close friends have to bear the brunt of that in the meantime, but it's, like, I think collectivism, the collectivism that is Japanese society is Japan's greatest strength, but it's also sometimes its greatest weakness, because conformity extends to skin sometimes and appearance, and it's
We're getting some of the most interesting questions here, and I've got a time limit here. We're not going to be able to get to all of these. I don't know if there's a way that we could go in and answer them, on the chat through YouTube, through text, but there's some directed at me. I want to take, I'll take this one from another filmmaker, Aaron Woolfolk, who is here.
Oh,
yeah, Aaron, who also made an incredible film Bridge to Harimaya, the show. Is that right?
Hariyamabashi. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Hariyama Bridge.
Yes. And he has a question that I think is a really nice way to kind of wrap up here. He's asked, do you have any specific stories of your beautiful film changing hearts and minds in Japan and elsewhere for that matter? And I kind of wanted to, I know you kind of answered a little bit of that in your last statement here, but I can tell you that I showed this film to my mother. And it was hard for her to watch. She had to make a decision about whether to stay in Japan in the 60s with my older sister in a time, early 70s before Okinawa reverted back to Japan. It was a very difficult time for Black mixed race people, especially in Okinawa, who were kind of identified as America, not even America. And so she's very cynical about change in Japan, incredibly cynical. But every once in a while she'll see a show, a film like yours or even Aaron's, and she'll say, because of Jero, things are changing. Because of Jero, or maybe things are changing. But I know there's that real hard cynicism for people who raised mixed race people earlier on in Japan. But maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about how these narratives are changing, that specific stories of how they've changed people and their perception about real change for mixed race people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just like 2 weeks ago when the Black Lives Matter movement started, when the protests were happening, I had a good Japanese friend of mine. She's a fashion designer. I don't think she's left Japan much in her life, but she's seen Born with It. She was one of the Indiegogo donors, one of the initial Indiegogo donors. But I think watching it again in light of, the George Floyd protests and like the plethora of inequities that the Black community were putting on display, not just with police brutality, but all the other things, and just witnessing it from Japan on the news, because she reads a lot of global news. She wrote me this little big long email talking about how she really appreciated Born with It because it kind of got her thinking about, how to treat Japanese people that don't look like her. And, it opened up her eyes a lot more than she would have if she hadn't seen the film. I think, Michael, you've told me about a lot of your mixed race friends that have seen the film and gotten more confidence and and have been not as coy to kind of share their story with people as a result.
I mean, like a lot of parents are also like email me on message all that and I'm really happy that it really happened though. Yeah, we used to talk about, you used to ask me questions and it made me remember about things, but it was a good experience and I'm really happy it was really happening. And I really thank you for making me a part of this, right? But through sports, music, I think it's gradually changing Japan. And I hope this movie will be a part of a big change, for the Japan, like society and stuff, Right.
Thank you.
Baye, do you have any final thoughts that you want to chime in with, especially, given that we're in this climate of Black Lives Matter and how people are kind of understanding what is happening transnationally around the world in terms of really addressing systemic problems. How does that translate in Japan? Any final thoughts in relation to the film? Anything you want? I want to give you the space to kind of wrap up here.
When I first came to Japan, this was 2004 or prior to 2004. I really believed that when I came here, I was going to encounter a nation of allies. I firmly believe that, because I was very knowledgeable about some Japanese history as well as American history, and I saw that there was so many reasons why they would find white superiority or white supremacy problematic. I could see, I felt that before I even came here. So I felt that I was coming to a country who would be able to sympathize and empathize with the experience of people of African descent in the diaspora, and especially in, well, maybe not the U.S. so much, since we were responsible for so much horrible things that have happened in this country. But people of African descent, I didn't think that they will hold us responsible in that way, because definitely the most of the horrible things that have occurred here in Japan, via the West, have come from the U.S. This being the nuclear bombs and Commodore Perry, opening them under force, opening the borders, by force. But and also after well, before I go there, so I felt that I was coming to a country of allies, and when I got here, I learned that there was a different narrative among the Japanese. And I learned this when I was working. When I first came here, I was working at Nova. And one of the first narratives I ran into, at Nova, they had this room called the Voice Room, where you can have these kind of free conversations with Japanese students. And I learned that there was kind of a narrative about World War II that many Japanese felt like we were a militaristic, nationalistic, kind of war-crazed nation until these nuclear bombs were dropped on us. And then after that, we became a kind of gentler, peace-loving nation. So in a way, it was kind of a good thing that this happened. And I was like, what? It was a shock to me to hear that spoken. And they kind of framed it in a way where, it wasn't saying that, it was a good thing, but it wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to Japan, because they came out of it a much better country. So, and it kind of reminded me of the kind of narratives that were used by Europeans against people of African descent, telling them, you're lucky that we brought you here in chains to America as slaves, because if we had left you in Africa running in the jungle butt naked, you would have gone to hell, because you wouldn't have had Christianity, and you probably would have been eaten by your neighbor. So we saved you from all of that by bringing you here in chains and, and stripping you of that culture, that history, that language, all the things that you had in Africa. So I felt like, if Japanese might be able to find some kind of commonality with us, having both been victimized by white supremacy and white superiority. But I didn't encounter that until I came in contact with our biracial brothers and sisters here, because I felt immediately that they were the Black people here in Japan. They were the ones who had the very similar experience to people of African descent in the US. They have more of a connection because they are Japanese, but not Japanese. They are full citizens, yet second-class citizens, yet marginalized and alienated by the society, very similar to the experience of African Americans in the States. And I realized, wow, these are the allies we've been looking for. And I realized this early on. Maybe I was 4 or 5 years into my tenure here. And I said, okay. And that's when I started to feel a stronger bond, a stronger camaraderie. This is around the time I started, being exposed to things like grits and sushi and this kind of thing, because I was like, wow, this is the energy, this is the creative and positive energy that I needed, that inspired my blog, local Yokohama, which is when I first started writing about, life here in Japan for people of non-Japanese living here in Japan. So, my point is that I think that the alliance between non-Japanese and Japanese is strongest with biracial people here in Japan. And I feel that when I talk to you, Michael, when I interviewed you and your brothers at the cafe, I'm like, yo, these are my cats, right? These are my boys right here. And I felt that when I'm watching your film, Emmanuel, I mean, you get it. You can see the correlation between the experience of people of African descent all over the world in the diaspora and here in Japan. So, I think once more Japanese people are aware of that connection, that narrative, it's going to inspire some people to take action and make more positive change. I mean, even in the last couple of weeks, for example, as a result of my bringing some global attention to that NHK anime, that problematic NHK anime, as a result, and this is the government, basically NHK, they have taken action. I mean, aside from that profound apology, I've never seen anything like that in my 16 years here. But aside from that, they've actually enlisted me to kind of talk to them and help them understand better how that segment was problematic and how they can avoid these things moving forward, and how they could have done it in a different way, where the response would have been, instead of, oh my God, what the hell is wrong with these people? It could have been, oh my God, Japanese people truly get it, and they realize how what's happening in the U.S. is having a profound effect on other countries, including Japan. So that kind of thing is happening right now, and I see it, and I'm part of it, and I'm hoping that as we move forward, it's going to be many positive results. So.
There have been some really interesting moments of solidarity throughout Japanese history, Afro-Asian solidarity, and I think there's a lot of room for even more. I mean, in the past, with indigenous, Ainu people to Okinawans who, there's a really great author, Yuichiro Onishi, who work on trans-Pacific racisms, and to Anne-Maria Shimabukuro, to Eriko Ikehara, who's doing work, who's got a center down in Okinawa. These are folks who've been writing a lot about, these kinds of pushing the narrative of this kind of really kind of doing research on how there have been moments of solidarity between people of African descent and Japanese, and there's been some real good interesting research in the past that we could really take important lessons from. I didn't want to discount some of those moments, and I do know that in the past you've talked about even your own movement to Japan, and how you at one moment you felt like, oh my God, I have this relief, this burden off of my back, where I don't have to constantly be looking at, for, I guess, being racially profiled in that kind of real, kind of tangible way that a lot of Black men feel in the United States. So there is that kind of also this interesting pathways for solidarity in many different levels, from that kind of intimate level to, looking at history for lessons for what worked and what failed in these moments. So thank you for sharing that, Baye. Okay, there's so many good questions here. You all are bringing it. So many people. I see a lot of questions here, and maybe, and I've been told we can go on just a little bit longer because there's so many good questions. It looks like a lot of people are looking for resources to learn more about these kinds of issues. So I think earlier there's a question about what kinds of groups or communities that support mixed race Japanese or even non-ethnic Japanese with each other. There's lots. And there's lots of Facebook. If you go on Facebook, you can find a gazillion. Michael, I think you're part of some in Japan, right?
Right.
And there's, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I know that Edward Tsumoto runs I mean,
Right.
you all know Ed. Everybody knows Edward.
Sumoto. Right.
Sumoto-san, right? He runs some really fantastic
Mixed roots
groups.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
you can join them on Facebook. Lots of communities, not just for the people who are mixed race, but also for parents to learn a little bit more. There's somebody asked a fantastic question about, you know, how epistemologies are changing, even in academia. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about that too. I don't have time to go over all that right now, but there's a movement of people who are studying, you know, about Japan who are Black themselves or mixed race, and really trying to change up the way that we can hear, pushing Asian American studies to think differently about how we do research, about how we include where all the invisible kind of research has been hidden. But maybe the three of you can talk a little bit about resources. Where do you go to find support?
On the net.
On the internet?
I think that there are a lot of Facebook groups out there, and I could send some of the group names to the administrators. I don't know how people are going to find links later, but Mixed Roots is a great one, run by Edward Sumoto. Baye, you're going to have to chime in. I don't know if there's any other major Facebook groups that you know of. As far as just like resources to learn more about these issues, I think Hafu, which is a great documentary, which starred, Michael's brother David, which was directed by a good friend of mine, Megumi Nishikura, came out 2010, I believe, or 2009.
Like that.
Yeah, really, really comprehensive film that speaks to, you know, not just mixed race Japanese of Black heritage, but also just like all different types of mixed race Japanese. Yeah, Korean, Hispanic. So that was a great movie. But yeah, I'll try to send some stuff to Japan Society and Japan American Society of Houston, and hopefully we could get some information out, and maybe Patsy and Joshua can kind of send stuff out to their followers.
Duncan has put together at USC, runs the Hapa Japan site and forum that is really brilliant. He put together an amazing 2-part volume on everything that you want to know about mixed race, written kind of, I guess, from like, I think the first volume is about history, and then the second one is identities and representation. So it's a fantastic place to look for sources. If you're doing like research and you're looking for a starting place, that's a good place. And every day there's more stuff coming out.
One thing I want to say is, you know, there's a lot of like mixed community and all that, but you know, we're all human. There are good people, bad people, you know. At the end of the day, you just got to watch out, you know, to choose, you know, to decide, you know, and all that. You know, it's a very convenient era we live in now, but I just want people to be also watch out, because people sometimes get pulled by just like colors and stuff. But I just want you to know there are good people and bad people. You know, there are good cops and bad cops, something like that. You know, so just be careful. Some people might use that on you, but you gotta, you know, stay strong and just be careful. You know, that's all I want to say.
This has been great. I'm glad that these types will take place more and more, and I think that this is how change comes about. You know, people talking about these uncomfortable subjects and dealing with them. So thank you for putting this together, Japan Asian Society in New York and Houston. And Mitzi, thank you so much for your hard work. You're amazing. You know, you blow my mind. You intimidate me, but you're fantastic.
It's funny, now his connection is perfect, but then it ended. But
had a good time with you guys, man. Really nice talking to you guys.
See you again, Michael.
Thanks for you guys again.
Thank
Hope
you.
we meet again.
joining us, and Emmanuel, for your brilliant film. And Patsy, thank you for organizing this, the Japan Society of Houston, H-Town, yay. And to the Japan Society of New York for hosting and putting this, the technology support behind this. I want to let you all know who are watching that the full panel discussion is going to be edited, and then it will be back on YouTube within the next week. And hopefully there I can go in and answer some of the questions that are directed at me. And maybe some of the other panelists can go on and address some of the questions that we didn't have time to get to. There's so many good ones here. So many good ones. So thank you for asking them. I'm sorry that we didn't get to some of them. I skipped because I knew it would take us on a whole another 15 minutes in a different direction. So I thank you all for joining us. Thank you all again for being a part of this possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.